Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, arguably the biggest football game that we're going to see all weekend. South Carolina heading on the road to play Clemson. Now, the reason I'm saying this is you look at both of these teams and where they come in the college football playoff rankings that came out Tuesday night. There's a very good argument to be made, and there's a very good chance that the winner of this football game it finds themselves in the 12-team college football playoffs. I mean, you look at Clemson; they're the last team out, sitting there at number 12. You look at South Carolina right behind them at number 15. There's not a lot of teams across the country that have the opportunity to notch a really impressive win this last week of the season. Both of these teams have that opportunity coming Saturday afternoon. Now, we did our normal preview and prediction episode, but we didn't really get into some of the nitty-gritty matchups that we're going to see. We want to circle back, and we're going to start from a South Carolina perspective. We're going to do pretty much the exact same episode, but from a Clemson perspective. Fired up to get into this one. Now, before we do, and as always, South Carolina fans, Clemson fans, the amount of support y'all showed the boys as we talked about this game Sunday. It was amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear from y'all in the comment section. There's a lot of really intriguing matchups that we're going to see play out. So appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's start with what I think is by far the biggest matchup really for both of these teams. What team can dominate with their defensive line? You look at South Carolina, in my opinion, the biggest storyline for South Carolina in 2024 is how dominant this defensive line has been. A lot of the national media wants to talk about Lenora Sellers, and Lenora Sellers has been a gamer the last couple of weeks, largely all the month of November. The reason this South Carolina team is where they're at right now is because of how dominant this defensive line has been. I mean, they're sacking the quarterback 10.2% of the time. That's number 3 in the country. I mean, Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart on the edge. I don't think it gets much better in terms of an edge rusher duo than that. And you got a guy like TJ Sanders on the inside. And you start reading off the numbers and the stats. I mean, they're incredibly impressive. Now, why I think this is such a big storyline, it's kind of twofold. It's one, Clemson on the offensive line is struggling massively with injuries. Now, I think they might get a few of those guys back heading into this matchup, but you go back to the last, kind of formidable defense. I don't really count the Citadel. And you look at this Clemson offense, you had Walker Parks starting at right tackle. And look, Walker Parks played a lot of football, has been a good player at the collegiate level, but has been a career guard. And he had to play right tackle because of all the injuries Clemson has endured. Didn't look great against Pitt. I think you can say the same thing for Trent Howard, who came in and played left guard. And so you look at Clemson against Pitt, they gave up 4 sacks, 15 tackles for loss. That's what South Carolina does best. And this matters for a couple of different reasons. One, creating negative plays, that's a really important aspect of playing dominant defense. But I think more importantly, you want to leave Clemson in these second and third and long situations. That's not where they want to be. And so you look at the number one matchup for both of these teams heading into this matchup both have really good defensive lines going up against offensive lines that have struggled at points in the season. I look at this matchup and say, can South Carolina dominate up front and create a lot of negative plays? That's storyline number one. Number two, if you're South Carolina's defense, you got to figure out a way to kind of take away Cade's favorite targets. Now, to be fair, I think Clemson has taken massive strides in the right direction in terms of just having a lot of different playmakers. You got 2 true freshman wide receivers in TJ Moore and Brian Wesco that have played some really good football that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But it's no secret that Antonio Williams and Jake Bringenstuhl are the 2 guys that Cade is most comfortable going with. I mean, you look at the target share, Antonio Williams, 79 targets on the year, Jake coming in with 56 targets. How do you take away these 2 weapons if you're South Carolina? This is a really intriguing matchup because I do think South Carolina has the personnel to do so. You look at Antonio Williams, spends a lot of time in the slot. South Carolina's got a really good nickel in Jalen Kilgore. And so that is probably the biggest matchup outside of South Carolina's defensive line to watch if you're a South Carolina fan. Can you try to take Antonio Williams out of this football game and force Cade to go shoot some pass catchers that, he's not as comfortable going to? And I think, secondly, Jake Bringenstuhl, that's been Cade's guy over the middle of the field. When Cade is getting into a little bit of a rut, He's going to go to guys like Antonio Williams and Jake Bringstool. Now, we talked about Jalen Kilgore potentially, and I don't think there's any taking away Antonio Williams because he's just too good of a wide receiver. But there's a way you can try to neutralize him and try to limit the impact he has on that football game. Very similar story for South Carolina taking away Jake at the tight end position. Now, you have a unicorn, in my opinion, in the back end, in Nick Enwinari. I don't think there's many safeties that are playing better football than Nick. At 6'3", 227, that's a safety. And, normally find those safeties, tight ends, those are important matchups. There's not a lot of safeties across the country that can deal with a guy like Jake Bringstool. Can Nick Enwinari be that guy? I think if you're a South Carolina fan, what you've seen from this kid really over the last 3 years, but more importantly this year, you kind of feel good about it. So you look at Clemson's two biggest weapons in the passing attack, Antonio Williams and Jake Bringstool. You kind of got the personnel to potentially deal with those guys. Can you limit the impact they have on this football game? That's going to be another big storyline for this South Carolina defense. At the end of the day, if you're South Carolina, can you dominate this game on the defensive line? Can you take away Clemson's favorite two weapons in the passing attack in Antonio Williams and Jake Bringstool? If you do those two things, you put yourself in a really good position to, kind of slow down this Clemson offense. Now, going to the offensive side of the football for South Carolina, what you're looking for here is that deeper third passing attack. And it's kind of no secret what Clemson wants to do on defense. One, it's a very aggressive defense, and it likes to go to a lot of man coverage with one single high safety, which allows you to work vertically on the boundary. And one of the big storylines for South Carolina over the last couple of weeks have been the emergence of guys like Nick Harbor and Delvin Campbell. And those are two big bodies that run really, really fast and that can work vertically down the field. And I give Dow Loggins a ton of credit in terms of, South Carolina's pass catching room, it's not necessarily elite. And I think a lot of South Carolina fans would agree with that. But what Dow Loggins has done is, hey, we got some wide receivers that excel at certain things, specifically working down the field. That's what we're going to lean into. We're going to run the football, work some play action, and try to hit explosive plays. And you look at Nick Harbor and Dalvin Campbell, those are the guys that if Clemson wants to go to that man coverage with just one single high safety, you probably want to attack some of those matchups on the boundary. Now, Clemson's got some good cornerbacks. Jaden Lucas, I think, is situated very well to deal with some of those bigger, faster bodies because he's a big, fast body. You look at Avian Terrell. Avian Terrell's one of the best cornerbacks in the country, but he's also not a very big cornerback. Can you maybe get some of those matches with Nick Harbor or Delvin Campbell on a cornerback who is very good? This is not me getting up here and saying Avian Terrell's not a good football player, but there's going to be a 5-inch differential between a guy like Nick Harbor and Avian Terrell. Can Nick Harbor go up and work vertically and make, hit some of those explosive plays? That's going to be a big storyline. And kind of to go along with that, this is, kind of where Lenore Sellers has emerged as a very, very dangerous quarterback, pushing the ball down the field. Lenore Sellers completing 51% of his footballs that travel 20-plus yards down the field. It's one of the best marks in the country. And although Lenore Sellers is still working on some consistency stuff specifically underneath, he's excelled pushing the ball down the field. I'm not going to make the Jalen Milroe comp, but that's kind of how we talked about Jalen Milroe last year, where, some of the underneath stuff was a little bit inconsistent, but pushing the ball down the field for whatever reason, he's very, very comfortable doing. And that's kind of what you're saying with Lenore Sellers. So if Clemson is going to play with a single high safety and try to put some bodies in the box to try to respect South Carolina's rushing attack and send some pressure and leave their cornerbacks on islands, specifically those boundary cornerbacks, can you take advantage and hit some explosive plays? Explosive plays for both teams are going to be really important because I think both matchups favor the defense. If you're a Clemson fan, I think you feel really good about your defense matching up against South Carolina's offense. And I think if you're a South Carolina fan, you feel really comfortable about your defense holding it and stopping this Clemson offense. And so what does that mean? Whatever team can hit those game-changing explosive plays, I think it's hard to see either offense consistently working the football down the field and staying on schedule. Can you mix in some of those explosives? That's going to be a really big storyline. And so I think the last one you want to talk about is the run game scheme. One of the things South Carolina does really well, and this is a benefit of having a guy like Lenore Sellers, you can run the football in a lot of different ways. This Clemson front seven is uber aggressive. They want to work upfield. These linebackers want to fire downhill, and they're very good at doing so. Can you mix in some jet sweep motion? Can you mix in some read options? Can you mix in some design quarterback runs for Lenore Sellers that incorporate some misdirection? This Clemson defense is hard to run right at because they're very good in the front seven. When we've seen Clemson struggle, it's been with some eye discipline stuff. It's been with some assignment stuff. Can you give a lot of pre-snap motion? Can you kind of confuse this Clemson defense? Can you get their eyes wandering in the backfield and kind of capitalize running the football that way? It's something South Carolina's done a very good job of over the last couple of weeks. And Rocket Sanders is starting to look like a guy that just is an all-American caliber running back. That's kind of what you're looking for. And when you have a quarterback like Lenore Sellers that is that dangerous with his legs, it gets really easy to run the football in a lot of different ways and throw a lot of different run scheme at Clemson. I think that's what you're going to need to do if you want to have success running the football. Those are my 4 keys. Again, and we're going to run this back for Clemson. I think there's very similar keys, to be honest with you, for Clemson that South Carolina has. Now it's about what team's going to go out and execute it. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. South Carolina fans, tap into the Clemson one too. I think, I think it's going to be fun for both South Carolina and Clemson fans to get a feel for, hey, what matchup should we be looking for in this football game? Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, the support means the world. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.